Welcome to The Code, your guide to health and human performance. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Fix from Physio Room, a performance-based rehab facility here in Denver. On this podcast, we're going to explore the key areas of your life that impact your overall health and wellness, from sleep hygiene and stress management to nutrition, movement, relationships, and more. We bring you conversations with industry experts and top performers to share strategies they have for cracking the code on health and human performance. Now let's get to today's show. All right, welcome back, guys. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Code. Today, we're talking to Dr. James Stetson, team member here at Physio Room. He is a performance-based chiropractor that joined our team a couple months back. And he's a CrossFit athlete, 2021 Crossfit Games athlete. So thanks for coming in and being on the show, James.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is neat.
Absolutely. Well, as you guys can see, we're sitting in our office here today at our tech center location at Physio Room. And if you're tuned into this on the video, but James, what I want to start with is you just filling the listeners in a little bit on your background. Where'd you come from? How'd you get here? And just, paint that picture for us.
Yeah, so obviously you know a whole lot about me, but the people at home don't. I am originally from Kansas City, Kansas side, for those of you who know that it's split down the middle. And I came out here to Colorado because of Colorado. In all honesty, the mountains kind of drew me ever since I was a kid, taking vacations here and always enjoying all the outdoor activities. As active as all the people are, it just is where I fit in. So I came out here for a different job actually, and just didn't quite work out for me. It wasn't a great fit. So came over to Physio Room, but along the way, I went to the University of Arkansas for undergrad, had a pre-medical kinesiology track basically that allowed me to take a handful of different routes if I so chose. And through a bunch of different experiences that I had at Arkansas, I actually got to work in the athletic department as a student athletic trainer for 3 years. Two for the football program and one for track and field. So got to have hands-on with future NFL athletes, Olympians, really cool experiences with people that I didn't necessarily have like star shock to. They were just fellow students like I was. And through that, got some experience with orthopedic surgeons, neurologists, chiropractors, PTs, athletic training. And through all those experiences, I kind of decided that I wanted to spend a lot of time with patients, and I wanted to see actual change as it occurred and create relationships, which I couldn't do as an orthopedic surgeon, which was my actually first choice originally. Probably more so just for the background to it and the stereotypes and being a doctor and big price tags and all that stuff. But 12 years of school didn't really interest me, and neither did short interactions with my patients and the people that I got to work with. So it came down to PT or chiropractic, and chiropractic back then had a larger scope of practice, which since has gotten basically the exact same between physical therapy and chiropractic, which is fantastic. So I went that route and headed out here and loving Physio Room, loving Colorado.
And here you are.
Here I am.
Well, and as you know, I spent a little bit of time living in Kansas City myself, and I don't know how many times I had that conversation with someone about Kansas City is in Kansas and Missouri. I had a lot of family members asking me, where do you live? Are you in Kansas, Missouri? I'm like, well, I can drive about 10 minutes and I'll be in the other one from where I'm at now. I too lived on the Kansas side briefly. And I want to touch on something you said about, relationships, and that's kind of what led you down this path instead of the surgeon route. My wife and I have been together for over 5 years, not married for 5 years, but together. And she actually just asked me that last night, if I had ever thought about being a surgeon, being an orthopedic surgeon. And I said, nope. And I said, I didn't want to be a surgeon then. I still don't want to be a surgeon now. And I mean, primarily it's because I want my clients, my patients to be awake when I'm working with them. I want to be able to spend more time with them. And that's what we get to do. And it all comes back down to that whole relationships thing. Well, what we're going to do today, and of course, the title of the show, The Code. We're going to talk about health and wellness, fitness. What I want to know from you, and you're wearing the sweatshirt, is what got you into CrossFit in the first place, or when did you get into CrossFit? When did that take place? And, how long have you been participating?
Yeah, so I have been doing CrossFit for 7 years now. And I originally got started in undergrad. I had been an athlete all throughout high school. I was 135 pounds soaking wet when I graduated high school, and played soccer, played baseball for a little bit, but my main sport was golf at the time. And through that, I had the opportunity to go through the recruiting process for soccer or golf. Ultimately decided not to, more so on like a lack of wanting to, but kind of dismissed any opportunities that I had to play in college for long-term benefits. It just didn't seem like a great long-term choice, because I knew I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, but I wanted to be competitive. And so when I got to undergrad, I started lifting weights on my own for the first time ever, gained quite a bit of weight pretty fast, good weight, but weight nonetheless. And then one of the guys that I worked out with, his name is Brandon Harvey. He is an athletic trainer back in Kansas City. So shout out to him if he ever listens to this. He pulled me into CrossFit by inviting me to a 5:30 a.m. class right after Halloween, if I remember correctly, in 2014. And I went, and I very clearly actually remember everything that happened that day. We built up to a heavy 3-rep power snatch, which I had never snatched in my life, never even heard the term. And so I was learning it, and I don't remember what I worked up to, but I want to say it was like 115. And I thought that was pretty darn good at the time. And from that, we went into a Metcon of lighter power snatches and ring dips, 21:15.9. And I don't remember what the time cap was. That's one thing I don't remember, but I do remember getting time capped and getting dusted by pretty much everybody, including one of the female athletes who ended up being a teammate of mine in 2016 and became a pretty good athlete herself. Her name's Janelle Schaefer. So shout out to her if she listens to this. But she just smoked me. Not only did she lift more than me, but she lifted it better than me, and she went faster than I did. And that was the case for everybody. So it's not just like a her thing, but like she, and the way that she moved that day was kind of inspiring and just like lit a fire underneath me. It was like, if I thought I was this pretty good athlete, but I just got creamed, like, why? And I don't want that to happen again. So I kind of started getting into things. And if any of you out there go to my Instagram, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see some of my very early snatching situations that are fantastically beautiful. So heads up there. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started. And then over time, I got into it a little bit more, started to do it more often, and did it in undergrad at Arkansas. I had a gym there, CrossFit 540. Through that, I started to get more into the competitive side of things. So back then, a female named Brooke Wells, one of the best American CrossFitters now, was a member at 540. And I was trying to work towards being able to work out with that kind of competitive crew. And ultimately got to that for a little while before she left, I left. She and I never really like crossed paths a whole lot, but I did train in the same gym, so it was kind of neat. But but from there, went back to the original gym that I started in and went to regionals for the first time in 2016 with a team there. And for me, I thought that was kind of the peak of my competitive journey, if you will, career. The CrossFit Games season kind of changed in its scope and like how you qualified for regionals and semifinals and stuff like that. At that point in time, I was not an individual athlete. I don't know if I am still to this day, but it was very unrealistic for me to go past any of the large competitions, let alone qualify for them with how it was. And And so I kind of thought my competitive stuff was done, and it turns out that wasn't the case.
Absolutely. Well, and you just said the word competitiveness again, and I can tell from working with you on a daily basis that you're competitive. And 10 or so minutes already into this episode, if you know James, there's a good chance you'll get a shout out if we ever have him on a podcast again, because he's already listed off like 4 or 5 people that he's known and trained with. But what it sounds like to me, and this has happened in my own life, is you got into the sport, into CrossFit. You got humbled at the beginning by some people that kicked your tail. And that's one of the funny things, that like there are so many different forms of being like in shape and fit. And if it's not specific to a particular activity, you could be an amazing swimmer, but you're probably not going to be very in shape for wrestling season or for basketball or track or whatever. Well, and CrossFit is one of those things too. So I guess the question that I wrote down as you were talking there is like, being competitive and getting to the CrossFit Games with your team, which we'll have them on this show too. How do you use that like competitive nature to fuel what you do on a daily basis, even if that's not in the gym? Just like how you conduct yourself in the office, at home, like there's got to be some portion of like, how do you compete just in your daily life?
That's a good question. I think just by nature, I'm a pretty competitive person in general. So my family will shout this out all day long. One of my favorite things to do is play Catan, a board game with them, and I get very competitive. And my mom and sister have said this many times, that it's not about winning for them. It's about making sure that I don't win. And not that I'm a poor sport in any way, shape, or form, but it's just kind of like been drilled into me. And I don't really know how that happened, but I think that being as small as I was coming out of high school and just not ever really being anything special athletically kind of drove me towards, on the CrossFit side, pushing for something that seemed so far out of reach and something that I thought that I might have some potential in. And I take those same feelings, and I want the best for myself as an athlete, as a human. And I like to try to project that into my clients. And for them, they have goals and things that they want to do. And sometimes they feel like they're out of reach, and it is motivating for me to get them to that point, and pushing them and finding their drives to use and turn them into competitors, whether they know it or not, is a way that I can stay competitive, because I want to make sure that they reach their goals, and they can stay competitive because they get motivated by seeing progress. And if they're not seeing progress, then I'm not doing my job, and I don't feel like I feel like I'm losing, if you will. And I don't like to say that I don't like winning as much as I hate losing. So I don't like that feeling.
Yeah, whether it's playing board games or with your clients, what it sounds like to me is it's not so much that you want to win, but you want results.
100%.
You don't want to just be like hitting the status quo, just plateauing. You don't want your clients to plateau. You want results to happen. So then I already sort of know this. I don't know if all of our listeners know this, so I want you to share this with them. If you've ever been to a physical therapist or you've ever been to a chiropractic office before, you know that the service that you get can look different from one establishment to the next. There's many different types of offices. Every provider has their own little artistic flair on how they provide care to their clients. And I know your style, and this is why I said performance-based chiropractor when I introduced you here a few minutes ago. I know your style of chiropractic care is a little different than what I've seen in the average chiropractic office that I have found myself walking into, or clients of mine that tell me about the office that they've gone to. So share with me a little bit, or share with the listeners a little bit of like your approach to chiropractic care, because I know it's a little different than the typical.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a handful of different ways that I explain this. I actually had a new client this morning, and one thing that I tell people is I am a bad chiropractor.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. I've heard you say that before.
The way that I treat is more hybrid style, if you will, more physical therapy, rehab, but there's still some modalities and sometimes adjusting. But the way that I treat is I use an assessment tool. It's called the Selective Functional Movement Assessment. And based on that, I figure out where we have dysfunctional movement, where we have functional movement, pain, no pain. And then from that, stability, dysfunction, or mobility dysfunction. And then I match my treatment to each of those avenues. If we have true mobility issues, which tend to be the minority, that's when I would adjust and do the more chiropractic-y things. But most of the people I see have stability issues, so we're not firing our muscles properly, we aren't accessing our full range of motion, but we have the full range of motion. And so it's a lot of corrective exercise, which is the stuff that I really love doing, which makes it so much more fun for me, but it also means that I get to spend longer periods of time. So typical chiropractic appointments for the most part, and how I treated originally was, 5 to 10 minutes with the doctor. Maybe you're with another therapist of some sort doing soft tissue work or e-stim or laser therapy, something else. But it's very short with your time frame with the practitioner. And for me, in a previous life, I always felt very rushed into, there are like these 6 or 7 things I want to do with this client, and I just don't have the time to do them. And by that time, they're already out the door, and I don't feel like I had done a good enough job. So when I actually came out of school, this was the way that I was taught. When I went through the SFMA course, was a very clinic gym hybrid type model, longer patient visits, more hands-on, and building that relationship piece that we talked about earlier. So that's how I always wanted to practice, and I just never had the opportunity until I came to Physio Room, and now I have the opportunity every day, and it's amazing how much more I enjoy things, which then projects that enjoyment onto my clients, which makes it easier for me to help them reach what they want to do. So in the simplest of terms, I don't adjust a whole lot. I maybe adjust 1 of 7 patients. And other than that, I'm doing a lot of dry needling, a lot of soft tissue work, and a lot of exercise.
Yeah, and I mean, I get the chance to see that every day, right? I'm here in the same office as you, and I'm a physical therapist. You're a chiropractor. There is a lot of overlap in what I do with clients and what you do with clients. Quite frankly, if the person coming in didn't know that you had 1 degree and I had another one, they probably wouldn't even know if no one told them. 100%. And what I think, and this is what I was taught, is like high quality patient care, client care, is the more active the treatment is, the more beneficial it is. The more passive it is, meaning that the client's not doing anything, the less they are able to take what they've learned or done in that session and carry it forward into their life to try and improve themselves. So yeah, I mean, that's how I explain your treatment approach to other people that ask me. Is like, well, how is he different than another chiropractor? And I say, typically, and this isn't to talk down on any other office, it's just different. Most chiropractic offices have a very passive treatment approach, meaning the client isn't doing much. The provider's doing a lot. But in your sessions, the client is doing quite a lot, just like they do in most of what people think of physical therapy, doing that active exercise side of things.
And maybe in like a somewhat bad way, and this, I don't know if this is a knock on the profession or not of chiropractic, but I almost want to introduce myself to people as a movement specialist, a physiotherapist, than I do a chiropractor, because it sets, if I say I'm a chiropractor, it kind of sets up this expectation in their mind of what that stereotypical chiropractic care is. And that's just not who I am. So it kind of changes their perspective just a little bit. And there are some chiropractors that are true old school chiropractic. They're really good at what they do, and all the power to them. It's just not my thing.
Yeah. Well, I think we see that on the physical therapy side too.
Oh, for sure.
Everybody has their own perceptions of what a thing is. So if you say to somebody, I'm a physical therapist, well, they may already have an idea of what they think physical therapy looks like, because either they've been to it somewhere else or their family member has had it. And I think our version, at least that we do here, just depends on what the person needs.
Yep.
Physical therapy in our office might look like doing small movement types of exercises to, get your glutes activating or recruiting properly. It might look like deadlifting. It might look like doing a box jump. It might look like teaching you how to breathe properly. I think it's just breaking the mold or breaking the stereotype on what people typically think of or the first thing that comes to mind. So I kind of find myself doing the same thing. Like, I don't always like telling people that I'm a physical therapist, because then I know they're already going to have some picture in their head. And I just don't know what that is. So I like to try to change that perspective too, just like you said.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, let's bring this conversation just slightly back around to the CrossFit side. Okay. Since I know we're talking about in the clinic and how you approach care, you work with a lot of CrossFit athletes.
Yep.
What are some of the main things, conditions or injuries, so to speak, that when you have CrossFit athletes coming into the office, what types of things are they dealing with? Like, what are you seeing the trend be when you're treating these folks?
Yeah, typically, I would say the main three are shoulders, knees, and low backs. Mm-hmm. And typically knees and low backs are correlated together. Low back pain is typically not your low back. It's mainly hips for the most part, sometimes thoracic spine, but that's what I see a lot of, is a lot of either movement pattern deficiencies with just not having the right proprioceptive inputs or outputs, and then glute control when it comes to low back and stuff, and then just shoulder mechanics in general. We, as CrossFitters, we go overhead a lot, snatching, presses, the whole 9 yards, pull-ups, really anything. But a lot of the shoulder mechanics that we see aren't necessarily perfect. And they don't have to be perfect, but a lot of deficiencies in trying to compensate through other mechanics, core control. I could go down a big old list, but I would say shoulders, low backs, and knees are the main ones.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Of the CrossFit athletes that I've treated, I would say 90% of them have dealt with one of those three things. That's what's leading them in the office. Have you ever dealt with one of those things yourself from CrossFit? I know you've had a knee injury that I don't believe was from CrossFit, but
it was not CrossFit related. Yeah. I've had my general nicks and bruises, but for the most part, I have stayed pretty injury free compared to your average CrossFitter and your average competitive CrossFitter. Mm-hmm. Because of the fact that I put so much weight into moving well over moving as fast as I physically could if I just throw everything to the wind. Yeah. Not to say that I don't do that. There is a time and place to do that in a competitive sense, but for general CrossFitters, I put moving well way above intensity, and we build intensity as we continually move well. And if we stay in good movement patterns, then typically we stay away from injury. So I've dealt with little knee pains from, again, glute issues, shoulder stuff just from, pushing the pace just a little bit too much and getting my mechanics off just a hair. There was a little strain and, rotator cuff and things like that. But for the most part, I've stayed pretty injury free. Knock on wood.
Yeah. Knock on drywall.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's all about moving well first, and then let that dictate how you move intensely or speed wise. Mm-hmm. Because if you're looking for a long-term life of health and fitness, moving well has got to be number one.
Yeah, and I like that lifelong part that you just touched on, because, you know, if you want to move for a long time into your whatever age you are, if you want to move into your 30s and 40s and 80s, you got to make sure you're moving properly, because then your chances of continuing that movement efficiency into your later years significantly goes up. And I know sometimes the competitive side of things, it throws a wrench in that. I remember back to when I was in high school, you know, learning how to lift, and I see these seniors, and I'm like a freshman, I see these seniors in the weight room, and they're doing their warm-up set of bench press, for example, and, you know, they're throwing a plate on each side and they're doing 135. And I just wanted to do what they were doing. Well, I couldn't do 135 at the time with good form, but I wanted to do that. And I remember struggling through reps where, you know, they probably didn't look the prettiest. What I should have done, and, you know, what the coaches were trying to get me to do was just put the weight on that's appropriate for you at the time. And by moving efficiently, you're going to get to that other point as long as you stay consistent with it. So I mean, I think that's basically what you're talking about, is
100%.
Learn the movement first, master the basics and fundamentals, and then layer in the competitiveness and layer in the intensity, and that's what's going to help you progress. So speaking of like progressing, layering these things in, and ultimately getting to a high level. So you had the opportunity to go to the CrossFit Games last summer.
Yep.
Madison, Wisconsin, my home state. So shout out to all you Wisconsin people listening. And so what was, I guess, your favorite part, or your like most positive, memorable part that came out of that trip and that experience? And then what was like the biggest learning point? I won't say like the worst part of it, but like your biggest like takeaway in terms of learning, or something that you can improve on, or like the biggest challenge that came out of that trip to the CrossFit Games.
Yeah. So for me, first off, I never thought I was going to make it to the CrossFit Games. I still, in all honesty, can't believe that I competed there. I just never thought it was in the cards for me, which might be part of the reason that I actually ended up making it, but that might be another episode down the road. Yeah. But my favorite part in general was just being able to spend time with my team. I really cherished all those moments, and like the times that we had in the house together. There was obviously the four of us teammates. We had one of our coaches, or our coach for the weekend. She wasn't necessarily our coach, but a really good friend, Colby. Hey, how are you?
Another shout out.
Another shout out. And then my mom and sister. My mom and sister came out and coached for us. They were kind of our support staff all weekend long. And our camera guy, if you want to say that, Trevor, who's fantastic as well. And just having those nights after long days of competing together, just like hanging out on the couch, sometimes watching back our own events, and just bonding together. We did a French toast decorating competition one morning. I mean, those are my favorite times. Not necessarily the stuff on the floor, which was all really darn cool, but it was spending time together. It was the relationships. I mean, we keep hitting on that point consistently, but that was it. And then when it came to like the hardest part, that's kind of a hard question to answer, because for those of you who don't know, the way that the games is set up is the games is very much unknown until you're in the moment. So most of our events weren't released until day of, or maybe night before if we were lucky. And there were a couple that were announced to us within 20 minutes of going out to the floor to do the workout. And for us in training, we as a team only trained for 5 months together before ultimately going to the game. So we started training together right before the Open started last year. And there were just some things that we didn't necessarily do together or have the equipment to do. They were really tough. So one of the first events in the stadium, so our very first event was a swim and canoe, which was hard to prepare for in general. And the way that it was set up made it more challenging, but we were somewhat prepared for that. But the second and third event were together, and it's this massive sled called Big Bob. And at first we had to push it, and it was 1,200 plus pounds. And then the second part, we had to pull it, and it was even heavier. And that workout, it was super hot on the floor. It was just a super heavy sled that you all push at the same time. So that's not something you can really recreate in training. You can do it a little bit, but not at those loads for sure. So that one kind of snuck up on us and rattled us just a little bit, if you will, but we kind of rallied as we went through the rest of the weekend. But that workout in general was mentioned as one of the hardest workouts that has ever been done team-wise at the games by a competitor who has been there since like the beginning. So I mean, it was hard for everybody, but yeah, that was probably the hardest part of the weekend.
Yeah, it sounds like of course you have to be very physically prepared to even get to that point, to make it through the qualifying rounds, to like qualify for the event. But I mean, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is more the mental side of things. Like you can't prepare is basically what you're saying. Like you don't know exactly what you're preparing for, and there's an unknown going into it. And it sort of sounds like to me, assuming everybody is very physically prepared, who's going to be able to handle that like mental shock of like, okay, this is what I've got to do. Who's going to be able to handle that? I kind of think back to like a football game or something. Like you can't control the weather, you can't control what the referee's going to call, if they're going to throw a flag or if a fumble happens. And it's like, who's going to be mentally tough enough to just handle the obstacles that come their way.
Oh yeah.
So then that makes a lot of sense. And then touching back on what you said a little bit ago about what your favorite or most memorable part of it is I wrote this down, and then you said it, the theme of everything that you're talking about, your background, your practice as a provider, your CrossFit Games experience, it's all coming back to people and relationships. And quite frankly, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with all the other people that you're around, which I think is awesome. So speaking of other people, to share some like a tidbit of knowledge or your own experience with the people that are listening to this episode, when speaking of like health and wellness and the things that you have done over your training life and just like your life in general to take care of yourself and prime yourself to perform at a high level and whatnot, if you could summarize this like pretty briefly so that you don't say every little detail, but like what would you say is the number one or top two things that you think are the most important in your ability to perform at a high level? Like what are your keys or cracking of the code to health and wellness and performance?
Yeah, so I'll give you two. The first one, and both of them apply to everybody, not necessarily to competitive fitness in any way, shape, or form. And I don't necessarily think that competitive fitness is the end all be all or even all that important, in all honesty. We're working out against each other the best we possibly can. But the first one would be just to show up. Not every day is going to be sunshine and roses and clear skies, but just showing up and staying consistent and doing the little things makes for long-term success. You don't have to, PR everything every single day. You don't have to run faster than you did yesterday, but just by showing up and creating this 1% better mentality, over time, that gets exponentially larger. So as you continually show up, you continually snowball effect into bigger and better things. Yeah. And then
it sounds like sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I mean, it sounds like an investing type of idea,
yes.
Right? Like, if you start some investment account early on and you just keep showing up and just keep putting your couple bucks a day into this, your 1 cup of coffee worth a day, that's going to have little gains on the front end, but it's going to exponentially gain on the back end when that interest kicks in. So yeah, that sounds exactly like what you're talking about.
Yeah, you look back and where you started is not at all where you're at right now in a good way. I do that constantly. But number two is make it small, digestible tidbits. Yeah. And for me, this plays directly into like how I do nutrition with people is
Mhm.
I don't necessarily need to do these 3 huge life changes, because if we do that, you start cold turkey, chances are you're going to fall off.
Yeah.
So just add one little thing per day, and it could be as simple as, wake up without resetting your alarm, or drink an extra glass of water, or cook one meal this week. Like, they don't have to be these big broad changes of, you need to work out for 3 hours a day every day of the week. No, do 10 burpees in your living room. It doesn't have to be hugely time consuming. It doesn't have to be expensive and fancy. Like, the little things add up, just like we were talking about. So small digestible bits that are constantly repeatable, and then just showing up to those, put those 2 together, and you're gonna have a lot of success.
Yeah. Have small, small goals, keep doing the stuff over and over, do hard things, and just keep repeating them. And basically, it sounds like you're saying that's going to lead to the results down the line. Well, James, this has been awesome having you on. I know we're like a little bit up against it. What I want to know is, for anyone who listened to this, if they want to be able to communicate with you more, or they want to find out more about CrossFit, or how you can help them with their shoulder, or anything like that, where online can people find you?
Yeah, so the best way to find me is on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active, and I have other social media accounts, but honestly, I don't use Facebook a whole lot and stuff like that. So Instagram is the place to find me. My handle there is at James Stets, Stets. And then you can always shoot me an email, james@physioroomco.com. Those are probably the 2 best ways. And then from there, we can kind of connect and figure out how to further connect.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for your time being on here. Thank you for anyone that tuned in to listen to this, for tuning into this episode of The Code. Connect with Dr. James if you want to know more or have any more questions with him. And stay tuned for a future episode where we have his CrossFit teammates on here to hear more about their games experience and their side of the story as well. Thanks a lot for listening.